Hello there, I'm Giglamesh, and welcome to Prompted, the official podcast for the writing prompts section of reddit.com, where you are prompted to write stories, and here we showcase the best of them, all with the goal of helping each other to become better writers.
Alright, stop right there. Hands away from your keyboard and where I can see them. You have the right to keep listening, and anything you say can be classed as feedback. If you haven't already guessed, my name is Sergeant Giglamesh. You're listening to Prompted, and this week's theme is police. Yes, that's right. Detectives, narcs, sheriffs, and pigs. Those who uphold the law, investigate the breaking of it, and stereotypically eat donuts while doing it. We have them all this episode, and once again we're very lucky to have our own consulting detective, M.N. Bryan, on the case, to help answer some of those burning questions you have. Well, I think I've held up this investigation long enough. Why don't we go see our favorite informant, L.L. Coolbrap, and see just what kind of story he's telling this time. The prompt was written by Throwaway1231231231A, and the story was by Psycho Alpaca. In a dystopian future, fun is the currency and sole reason for living. The rich have all the fun, whilst the poor live dull lives. Backstreet fun is produced and policed by the Fun Police.
You asked me how this all began. I'd tell you all about Eve's smile. Tell you about how her teeth were cloud white and her lips red, and how it felt like the universe itself was acknowledging you when she threw one your way. That smile's what got me where I am today. I first saw it when I was 8, back in the overgrown grass lot behind the soap factory in District 7, close to where the kids stayed during recess, just sitting around. Eve called me. "Rust, come over here," she said. I remember. I was 7 years old, all alone on a corner, contemplating the fact that the concept of a single unified ego that defines us is an illusion crafted by our senses. "Quick!" I got up and dragged my feet towards her. She pulled my hand and took me to the back of the factory. "What, Eve?" I asked in a tired voice. I was trying to deal with the fact that human consciousness is an unfortunate side effect of evolution that causes us pain beyond belief. You interrupted me. That was all we did all day. Still, all kids do all day in the districts, where fun is rare. Contemplate, think, go on about the shitty things in life. Without fun, you can't help but see things for what they are. It can hurt sometimes, but you get used to it. "Check this out," she said, and then she did something I had only ever seen in ads in the sky. She opened her lips in a crazy, beautiful smile, and I almost gasped. "Where did you get it?" I hushed, looking around to see if no one was watching. "A friend of my mom," Eve said. "She gave me some to play around today." Soon as it appeared, it was gone, the smile. Eve went back to normal face like me. "That's it?" I asked. "Yeah," she replied. "That's all that was left. I saved it to show you." She sighed. "All right. Now I'm going to deal with the fact that in a world that contains suffering, an almighty and benevolent God is a paradox and therefore cannot exist." And from that day on, I made it my life's mission to get that smile back into my life through means of her face. I was going to put that smile there so she could put it back in my line of sight, in my life, so things made sense again. The things I did, I'm not proud of. Not ashamed, but not proud. If there was another way, I'd do it, but there wasn't. If I wanted my life filled with smiles the way the girls in the ads smile, if I wanted Eve to smile for me again, I'd have to do what I did. Working my way up the Fun Police was easy. I came from District 7, which is the worst district. Knew all the bad places where people went for the fake stuff. Dealers, parties. 3 in the morning and 7, I knew the streets you'd walk around and hear echoing laughter coming from the buildings, and you'd know some wrongdoings was going on. I'd go undercover, narcotics, busting parties full of teenage no-goods, laughing, watching TV, playing games, listening to music, saving it all on containers to sell later, manufacturing illegal fun. I take it all with me to the station, leaving behind a trail of melancholic existential gangsters, broke and angry both at me and the barren universe, screaming F the police and the perpetual state of uncertainty of the rational man as I drove away. The pay wasn't good though. My salary would be enough for maybe a full week of us having fun, and that's when we didn't have the kids. After a while, I stopped taking the fun altogether, to leave more for Eve. It was hard for a while there, but I'll tell you, that first week, that 5th of every month when I'd get home and she'd shoot me that smile I was craving for days, oh, it was heaven. Even I not having any of the fun, I'd just stare heavy-eyed at her, and somewhere inside I'd feel okay. Not fun, no. Not happy, but okay. I'd feel peace watching her smile. But that is in the past. Now we have fun every day, all the time. Fun to last the rest of our lives. It was a victimless crime if you think about it. What I did was, every night I'd take it with me instead of leaving it at the evidence room. The illegal fun. Take it to Eve. Started doing it in 27. At that time, we had our first one on the way. Now I get home every day to Eve's smile, and I wake up to my kids' laughter all the time. All the time. We have breakfast and lunch and dinner smiling and talking, and I get to watch little Eric playing video games and little Anna playing with dolls with smiles on their faces. I get to talk to my wife about love and poetry and the weather, instead of the fact that reality is just a series of electrical impulses firing up inside a locked room that is my head. Now I don't think about the fact that death renders everything we do meaningless, and that there's really no point in doing things at all. I don't think about how, in hindsight, we might as well all be dead already, and that the only reason we even bother to wake up in the morning is our biological impulses we can't control. I don't even stop to consider the fact that free will might be an illusion, because we're all made up of parts, made up of cells, made up of atoms, made up of electrons, made of physical laws, that maybe the Big Bang was the only real thing that ever happened, and the rest is just consequence. I don't think about any of that, and neither does Eve and my kids. We have fun now. Fun is all we have. Fun keeps the wolf from the door. Well, sure, it's manufactured in a basement somewhere in the 7. Not the real deal, not real fun. Fake fun. Still,
Well, at least he'll be having the time of his life down in lockup. While we let him stew for a while, let's head over to our consulting detective, M.N. Bryan, to help us connect some of the dots about writing.
Hello everybody, my name is M.N. Bryan, and I am here today to talk to you on the Prompted podcast about some writing questions that users have brought in. So if you remember me from last week, I talked a little bit last week about who I am, what I'm doing here on the Prompted podcast. My goal is really to encourage writers to continue writing short stories, writing longer pieces, novels, things like that, and just to help you overall to improve your writing. So we did get a couple of questions, and I just want to run through them. The first question that I wanted to touch on is by Astralis. I probably butchered that name, but that's okay. She actually comes around the chat pretty often, and she asks the following. What's the common mistakes writers do in attempting to publish their first novel? Do they leave plot errors and fix spelling grammar errors instead? So there's really two sides to this question, in my opinion. The first side of this question is if you're approaching the self-publishing route. So often for self-publishers, the thing that we see the most, or that I see the most in self-published novels, is often there's not enough editing that has gone into some of the ones that newer writers, first-time writers are publishing. They get really excited, they finish a rough draft, or they finish a rough draft and a couple of revisions, and they really haven't run it through all of the different methodology. Like when you consider the traditional publishing route, every book that you look at on a shelf, not only did it get a rough draft version, not only did that author then have beta readers and alpha readers who would go through and read that book and provide feedback to fix things. After that, you have an agent who is also going to read that book and often provide some editorial advice as well on how to fix it so that it's ready to go on submission. Then you find an editor at a publishing house, and that editor will go through that book again and give you another set of edits, usually bigger picture edits. Then that editor will take it through, line edits, which are basically going through each individual line, ensuring that every single sentence is exactly what it needs to be, that it all flows nicely. And then there's also a fact check edit where basically they go through everything a third time and really check to make sure that all of the facts line up, so that if any items need to be changed, they get changed there. So we're talking like 7, 8, 9 full edits of the entire novel. And then even after that, what happens is traditionally published authors will send out what are called ARC copies, or advanced reader copies. And once again, during those ARCs, other readers might catch things who get these ARCs, and they might see, like this, they missed a word here, or they misspelled something, or there's a homonym here that is the wrong word for this particular thing. So there's tons of rounds of editing that a traditionally published book will go through, and even then you'll still end up, I think the statistic is 1 error per 10,000 words. So in an 80,000 word novel, your average 200 page novel, you're still going to have like 8 mistakes in the context of that. So, the amount of rigor that you have to go through in order to get to that point is pretty expansive, So when you self-publish, sometimes, a self-published author, especially a first-time author, won't really want to go through all of those steps, or maybe they've gone through them the best that they can, but they haven't really hired outside sources. I would highly encourage anybody who self-publishes a book to really go through those steps, to go through all of them as if you're traditionally publishing. Like even pay for an editor to go through and really help you with your content edits, and help you with your fact check edits, and help you with your line edits, and really dig deep into that novel to make it the best possible thing it can be. Because once somebody picks it up and reads it for the first time, something takes them out of the story, they might not get back into the story. Like your product as an author is all you have. So you definitely want to spend some serious time going through editorial processes. But yeah, usually the big things, sure, the spelling and grammar, mistakes happen too, but often what you see a lot of is like plot and continuity issues. So same on the traditional side, that's generally the thing that, like even when we talked about submissions and you go through that process with agents and with editors, like often the difference in a book that is going to get an agent versus a book that isn't, so often it revolves around voice, like how compelling is the voice that you have created, and then secondly, it so often is revolving around your plot continuity, like does it make sense? There's tons of examples that I can think of, and obviously I don't want to share any of them for just due to confidentiality and writers trusting, agents and readers with their words. We don't want to, talk through any of those types of things. But I can tell you that continuity is a big one. Like, you have something that doesn't quite line up. You have like a world made of like a ocean world or something like that, and like they never explain how these giant creatures that are living under the water, how they came to be, and like where they came from, and like how they can live if there's not enough food underwater to satisfy them. Things like that can break a reader's sense of wonder, and they can be like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So that's a really big one. So that's what I would say on that, both on the traditional side and the self-publishing side. Those are the things that I see most often. And it's definitely true that us as writers, we really can get caught up in a single sentence and wanting to make it perfect. But when you really think about a sentence, I mean, you read it as a reader for like 12 seconds at most, right? I mean, like you fly through a book. And yeah, I mean, you notice it when the writing's, when it's a really good turn of phrase, you might catch it. But when it's a really poor sentence, I mean, you might just overlook it and not really think twice about it. You just kind of read it and move on to the next sentence. So even those really beautiful sentences, sometimes there's a lot to be said for maybe focus on being clear, focus on having strong writing, but like don't labor over every single word and sentence if you're submitting to agents, because some of that will come through the rest of the editing process. So that's the first question. And the second question that we actually got was from 0.21 gigawatts. So let me read this off to you. Hello, I've really been enjoying the podcast. Thank you all for putting this together. I was wondering, how do you decide which of your ideas are good, interesting enough to expand into a longer story or a novel? And how often do you abandon ideas and projects? My concern, as with many others, is that I would spend a lot of time on a draft or concept only to find out that I can't sustain it at a novel length. What are your strategies for exploring a world or concept before actually writing it out? And how much do you outline ahead of time before diving in? So we got a reply right away from Consta135, who's talking a little bit about this as well. And this is what Consta said. Excellent questions. I know that I personally struggle with a lot of what you have said. I do a lot of outlining, and then when it comes time to write the story out, I just don't feel it anymore. I think the levels of preparation for writing any story of any length really depends on the person. If you're someone that needs a lot of structure, then use a lot of structure. For my own writing, the amount of structure and thought I put into my shorter stories is basically I come up with an ending, and I think about how I can write it in such a way that the ending is a surprise. Longer stuff, I outline the chapters, what paragraphs for each chapter to get a detailed outline, and then I treat each chapter as a short story. For me, it's about taking small steps. So I really agree with a lot of what Consta said. Really a big part of going through this process and deciding what ideas stick is really deciding what things have enough tension. When you first set up a concept for a book, when you just think about something, you got to make sure that there's enough conflict for the problem to be solved. In my series on writing prompts, I talked about the sandwich law, and I'm a really big fan of this concept, right? So the sandwich law dictates, and this is something I've just made up, but it works really well for me. It says, what is your main character doing, and why can't they just go make a sandwich instead? This is pivotal. Like, say you have a guy who's at home, and this is the example I used, a guy who's at home and he orders a pizza, and he wants to go get that pizza, right? Like, why doesn't he just stay home and make a sandwich? Like, that's another logical way that you can get food, eat. And if he just stays home and makes a sandwich instead of going to get that pizza, then your book is over, right? Like, he doesn't even need to go get it. And not to mention that there's nothing standing in his way. Like, you don't need to go get a pizza. You could want a pizza, but like, if there's a life-threatening situation, like if there's a bunch of bandits on the street, you don't want to like walk through life and death just for a dumb pizza, unless this is some kind of comedy or something like that. Like, that's just not something that most of us would choose. If there were gunshots in the streets, we're probably just going to stay home and make a sandwich instead. So normal people do not put themselves into conflict without a very good reason. Usually if someone's going to shoot, your best friend, you might jump in front of the bullet. But if someone just shoots, a random stranger, you probably won't do anything to jump in front of the bullet. We'd like to think that we would all just be that heroic and do that, but probably not. So the point that I'm really trying to get at here is that normal people don't put themselves in danger for just any reason, right? They're going to put themselves in danger because there's some reality that they're facing. So by comparison, let's say that you have the streets are full of bandits and you have a guy who's an agoraphobic, so he does not like going outside, right? And he orders a pizza because the lady who delivers his food didn't come for the last 4 days, right? And now you have a situation where you have somebody who's ill-equipped to deal with going outside, right? They're an agoraphobic, and they're forced to go outside and get this pizza because otherwise they're going to starve, or they got to make it to a grocery store, they got to find food somehow. Well, that contains within it a ton of conflict, and that can really be the difference. Like, you really want to look at the size of your problem should be equivalent to the length of time that you're writing about it. So a short story might have a simpler problem to be solved so that by the end of the short story you can solve it, but a novel needs to have a very big problem that has lots of complications that can last the length of the pages that you have. So that's the first thing I consider. And the second thing I consider, it comes from Stephen King, actually. When Stephen King talks about the ideas that stick with him, the ones that he actually turns into books, he's never afraid to just write a first chapter of something, just see how it feels, see how the tone feels, see if the idea has legs, maybe share it with a couple of people. Like, he's very well known for sharing things with his wife to see like if she likes it and if she thinks it could be a good book. But the other thing he does is he doesn't actually take a ton of notes. Like, what he sees is he sees his mind as a sieve, right? And so you throw a bunch of rocks into the sieve, and if good ideas are really big bulky rocks, and bad ideas can tend to be little smaller pebbles or like sand, and he just kind of lets it stay in his head until he's decided that he can no longer like deal with it just being an idea. So he lets the big rocks, the things that will stay in the sieve and not fall through, those are the ones that he decides to approach, because those are the ones that, stick around the longest. And I like that. I like that a lot. I like the idea of, the ideas that I find that I'm pursuing as a book are generally the ideas that have stuck with me for a long time. And I've just kind of opened a document and wrote out a little bit about what the idea might be. What's the main line of tension? And then maybe I'll have another, part of that idea come up, and I'll write a little bit more about that idea and what types of things will happen. So that's all I've got for you today. Again, this is the Prompted Podcast, and if you have a question for me to answer, we will have questions or the place that you can actually go to get these questions answered. There's 2 places. The first is if you go onto Reddit and go to r/prompted, you can see a thread there that we'll have posted for this upcoming week's question thread. And then on top of that, you can also email promptedfeedback@gmail.com. So if you send an email to promptedfeedback@gmail.com, then you can go ahead and send a question that way and just say that it's for Brian for that part of the podcast. And then I will go through and do the best I can to answer it. So that's all that I've got. So I will hand it off, and we will continue with stories.
I'm afraid our next perp, Katydid, is a repeated offender. In fact, I hear she's been causing trouble since episode 13. I guess we'd better go listen to her. No doubt her lawyers will get her out of trouble before this episode is over. The prompt was written by The G Critic, and the response by Ryushin Mazi. You're the typical hard-boiled detective, a private dick, a standard trenchcoat-wearing, fedora-wearing gumshoe, or at least you would be, if you weren't also a wizard.
I sat in my dingy little office, some nameless cheap bourbon sitting next to where I had my feet up on my desk. The light coming through the grimy window was fading. It was getting late. I was considering grabbing my traditional brown long coat and black fedora off the rack and heading out for some food, probably takeout. Han owed me a favor or two still and would probably trade me some beef and noodles for a few tales of some of my exploits. They might not be the complete truth, and Han knew it, but he said he liked the way I told him, and I wasn't one to turn down a free feed. As I drained the rocks glass I was measuring my booze in, I made up my mind and sat up. just as someone knocked on my door. I muttered and hoped it wasn't the landlord. "It's open!" I called, leaning back and putting the bourbon in a drawer of my desk. The door opened and revealed a truly stunning woman, just like all the TV shows and books I read as a kid that made me want to be a PI. She was tall, willowy, graceful despite the sky-high leather pumps she was wearing. Her clothes were business style, but expensively tailored. I was pretty sure her white blouse was silk, and it hugged her torso, only a little less than the twill skirt hugged her legs. The whisper as her legs rubbed while she walked said her stockings were real silk stockings, and not some nylon pantyhose. I was immediately suspicious. Either someone was playing a joke on me, or this woman was not what she seemed. I quietly palmed something else on my desk and watched her carefully as she sat on the edge of the leather chair across from my desk. "I'm told you can help me." Her voice was steady, even. Whoever sent her was smarter than have her try the sobbing damsel in distress routine. Her voice also held an odd note. Not really an accent, but her pronunciation was clipped, precise. Professor Henry Higgins would find nothing wrong with her speech. My suspicions peaked, and I fixed a hard stare on her eyes for a few moments. "That depends, miss." She let the silence lengthen, and that almost clinched it. Now to make sure. "I do have some experience with helping people, but I'm no bleeding heart. My services ain't cheap." As I spoke, I casually lifted my hand with what looked like a cigarette lighter in my hand. I even put a smoke to my lips, and then I flicked the striker. Flames shot up, but it only caused a hidden catch to strike, the small iron bell concealed within the body. The tiny chime echoed out of the hollow bottom of the cylinder, and the woman flinched and rippled. I took a drag from the cigarette and raised an eyebrow as I continued. "Especially not for fairies. In fact, I usually don't work with you people. Too hard to stick you to a straight bargain. Try old Harsdale down on 22nd Street. He's your people's go-to, isn't he?" The elf across from me looked rather annoyed. Whether at my trick or at being found out, it was hard to say. The Fae really don't like anything iron, and the sound of an iron bell is enough to send most of them into fits. Really, it was only because the sound was so soft and muffled by the walls of the lighter that she could stand it at all. "Seamus Harsdale is dead." She dropped all pretense, the full aristocratic, cold manner of her kind settling over her. I winced. I thought he was a fool, but I liked Seamus. He was a good man. He was our first trial, and while familiar with our kind, he was no more than a skilled amateur. We find ourselves in need of someone more powerful. "Get out," I interrupted, my face going rock hard. She looked shocked. Likely it hadn't been a long time since anyone had dared even the slightest rudeness to her. I didn't care. I wanted no part in whatever she had in mind. "I don't care what you're offering. I don't do divorce work, I don't find lost cats, and I do not take on grand quests. I'm an investigator, a detective. Get it?" I stood, warming to my topic. "I find out facts, and I give them to the people that hired me. That's it. Now, get out." As I said those words, they resonated on the air, and the walls of my office came alive with glowing blue runes. The elf looked downright flattened now, but she stood and composed herself, fixing me with a cold look. "You will regret your actions here today, Mr. Vargia. One does not reject the Fae courts lightly. not even a wizard of your reputed power. Go swallow a nail, I spat back as I held up the lighter again, brandishing it like a weapon, which backed with my wards could very well be. She made a little sniffing sound and stalked out of my office. I gave her a few minutes to get out of the building, then grabbed my hat and coat and left myself, locking up and hitting the pavement, heading uptown to Crazy Hans Noodle Shack. I needed a meal.
Well, I guess it was inevitable that internal affairs would get something on me. I can only hope you hear out this old sergeant's story before you throw away the key. The prompt was written by Valazard, and the response was by Winsome Jesse. In a fantasy world, a dragon works as a cop in a big city.
Quite frankly, I'm getting tired of all the questions. When I go home to my old village in the Wailing Mountains, how big is he? When I stop in at the sacred temple of Azaboroth, do you have to cast Protect on yourself every morning or what? When I drop into the tavern after my shift, he ever let you ride him? It's too much. After all, to me he's just Briz. Not Lieutenant Brithazar, not Brithazar the Great Golden Dragon, not the Mad Dragon Brithazar, the most tenacious detective on the squad and the only member of his species in the entirety of the City of Holy Light Police Department. Just Briz. He brings donuts on Mondays. My partner Briz. So I'm gonna put it all out there now. I'll print it up and hand it out and post it on all the null dimension boards. This is it. These are all the answers I'm gonna give, so don't bother asking after this. How big is he? No idea. Never officially measured the guy, and I certainly never thought to ask. Once, though, we did tie 25 orcs to his back from wingtip to wingtip so we could shake out some important information. So I guess his wingspan is 25 orcs across. 24, I guess. One fell off. As for his weight, he accidentally landed on a smoke shop once and crushed the whole thing, but he can sit in the center of the Great Stone Bridge just fine, so, whatever the middle point of those two facts might be. Does he breathe fire? Is this a serious question? Of course he breathes fire. He can melt like a smithy's entire inventory in the time it takes you to eat a leg of lamb. We have these things called city ordinances, however, which is why you don't see him whipping it out left and right. What's his weak point? Get the hell out of here with that one. Does he polish his scales? He actually goes to this girl on 14th for that. Tiny hands. She can get in between the scales, which is the key. He likes to look professional. Now, wait, why are you even asking? Does he hoard treasure? Hoard is a strong word. Briz certainly likes treasure. Gold, silver, gems, etc. I mean he's a government employee, so it's not like he can afford all that much, but he's got a nice little collection. People act like that's a weird hobby or something, but let's be real here, it's a great investment, not losing a lot of resale value there. Plus, it's part of what makes him so good at his job. A smart thief knows how to evade one of my find spells, but there's almost no way to hide quality stolen goods from Briz. He can track a silver shekel from one end of town to the other. That's why the dwarves are always making him offers for private security jobs in their mines. But that's not for Briz. He's all about law and orders. Plus, he might legitimately go insane inside a dwarf's mine. Better to avoid the temptation. Have you ridden him? Too busy riding your mom. Boom! What does he eat? Normal stuff. Whole sheep, whole goats, whole cows. Maybe an ogre, if he's been drinking. He's on a diet right now, but I can't say he's really sticking to it all that religiously. We're all trying to do the best we can. Are you ever afraid of him? No. Listen, Briz is my partner, but he's also my friend. Yes, there are times when he gets a little bit of the treasure lust and eats everyone inside a jewelry store, and I have to frame an elf and perjure myself in front of a grand jury, but that's just part of being a team. When he's having a bad day and ends up eating the farm's entire supply of livestock, I'm more than happy to set the place on fire and testify that the deceased farmer had a gambling problem. You watch out for each other. It's what partners do. How long do dragons live? Honestly, the amount of coke he does, I give him 3 years.
Okay, I admit it. I read that story and I'd damn well do it again. Being a cop used to be so black and white. The good guys stopped the bad guys. But now look at us. It's not even been 10 minutes and Katie Dead is out of custody. And once the court hears her report about how she was treated, we might as well throw our badges down the toilet. The prompt was written by D. Krause, and the response by Nick of Night. They reworked the justice system. Now in each cell there is a piano, and convicts are released after performing a song perfectly. Lesser criminals are assigned simple melodies, while the worst get full concertos. You've been a concert pianist your whole life.
The great hall is a marble mountain around me. I pull out the stool and set tall before it the grand piano. 4 men are seated behind a large wooden table, notebooks in hand. A bearded gentleman nods at me. You may begin, signore. It starts slow, wistful, adagio. A sonification of melancholy. My fingers crawl like spider legs from key to key. Each push of the sorrowful, singular minor notes are a burst of childhood memory. My father teaching me to play one half of heart and soul, while he effortlessly brings to life the other. I would bite my tongue in concentration, the taste of blood blossoming in my mouth, as I tried desperately to keep in time. Not that he'd care. He'd only laugh and ruffle my thick black hair. You'll get it soon, Roll, he'd say, and press his lips against my forehead. Now I add in purposeful, dissonant, flat notes that drag me to the moment of my mother's death. Hit by a car on her way back from the market. The cake for my birthday strewn in little brown pieces around the road. The driver stops and calls for help, but she is gone the moment her head has bitten the concrete. I come out of our house upon hearing the screams. I'm in time to see the blood and jam coalescing, forming a perverse syrup. The pace of the piece picks up to a moderate andante. My fingers begin a graceful dance across the warm, priceless ebonies. The irony of a prison like this, the very antithesis of beauty, owning the Kron Bosendorfer piano, is not lost on me. The counter-melody begins, vying for life against the darkness of the minor notes, as my siblings and I once fought for the attention of our drunken father. But he was content ignoring us, having only eyes for the buxom young lady next door. I remember my older sister nursing her black eye for daring to challenge his habits. The music swirls around me, and I mingle harmonic arpeggios in with the dual melodic structure. I see my father hit my younger sister with the back of his hand, as if swatting an irritating fly. I see myself jump on him and tear into his arm with my teeth. I remember the hospital roof high above me almost a week later, when consciousness finally returns. My father gets a little time in prison, as when sober, his piano playing is exceptional. I vow to one day play better than even he, so that I can get away with his murder. My fingers work themselves into a blurred frenzy. I see my teacher in that picturesque alpine village, who taught me how to not only play the work of the greats, but how to appreciate the music. The lady I met and I fell in love with, in that pretty little valley where the snow would gently fall. The bump in her stomach that I had not placed there. The warmth of her blood as it trickled down my chin. The first of so many. Seeing my father once more, a final time, stringing my piano with his guts, carving his teeth into keys. But that was only the beginning. I needed more for my great work to be complete. Abruptly, the music comes to a halt. "You have not completed the piece, signore!" The bearded man bursts out, rising to his feet. I notice the skin on his arms are dotted by tiny pimples, and I know he felt l'effraction at my playing. He is passionate about music, desperately disappointed at it stopping prematurely. Although he tries to hide it, he has not heard a pianist like me before, and I know that being unable to hear a piece rising to its intended crescendo is a form of torture to a man like that. Crushing a person's soul is a rather different feeling to taking life, but one I enjoy immensely nonetheless. "Have I passed?" I asked, suppressing my amusement, knowing I have done just enough. I run my hands over the worn wood of the Krumme Bosendorfer, gently caressing its softly rounded form. I will miss it, but I must return to my work. They look at each other's sweaty, pale faces, unsure for a moment, before finally answering with an uncertain but predictable yes. I smile and give a curt bow. I will see them again in time, I am sure.
Well, that's it, I'm afraid. The fat lady sang. The whole department is being forced to clean out their desks. The show for this week is over. Before we go, though, we'd just like to say another massive thank you to MN Brian for joining us, despite his tremendous work schedule. And thanks again to you, our listeners, for all your questions and feedback. You make this grizzled old sergeant want to cry. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to swing by reddit.com/r/prompted and leave your thoughts. Until next time, good words and good writing.